Hello.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 4D and Wakanda user group from 4DMethod. Today is August 30th, 2017. Let's see. On our agenda today, we're going to just go over a little bit more, again, about what 4DMethod is, what we're trying to do here. We'll get 4D news from Brian Young this week, or this meeting, as Jim is not available. We'll have a new segment called What the Blog that I'll present that will focus on some of the recent articles from the 4D blog. We'll get some Wakanda news from Zhang Liu, and we'll have the 4D iNug e-digest from Ed Hammond. And I'll also do one more segment called Hey 4D, where I make a suggestion for a new feature that could be added to the 4D development environment. And then we'll have the special feature that everyone's really looking forward to. We've got David Adams here, the guru himself, to talk to us about a publish subscribe component for 4D that he's written. That's based in V16 with all the new worker processes and call form and some pretty interesting functionality that will be free to use for everyone once he shares the component code. So we'll have some general questions and answers and talk about our next meeting on October 4th, 2017. Again, my name is Brent Raymond. That's me. This is the 4DMethod user group. You can go to our website at 4dmethod.com and contact us at the email 4dmethod@gmail.com. We get together about every 6 weeks to 2 months to try to bring together a scattered community of developers and users of 4D and Wakanda. We stream all of the meetings via YouTube Live, formerly Google Hangouts, and soon to be something else probably, to allow people to participate from anywhere in the world. We record all the meetings and presentations to be viewed again at any date, and we're getting to have quite a library of them. And our goal is to provide fresh new content and discussion and exposure for users and developers everywhere. So with that, I'll kick it over to Brian, who's the technical marketing manager at 4D, for some news about what's going on with them.
Okay, thank you, Brent. So Jim is sorry he couldn't be here for the meeting. He had some personal things he was set up long before we scheduled this, but he wishes us a great meeting. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the forums. So for anybody that hasn't been to the forums recently, they've been transitioning from the separate login system, separate from the rest of the 4D sites, to a single sign-on system that uses the same login you have for the store or Partner Central or any of the other 4D sites that you're used to logging into. So when you go to the forum, you will see two different places. There's the original place to log on, but in the banner, there's another link to click there that allows you to transition your old forum account to the new single sign-on. And I recommend everybody do it sooner than later. By mid-September, there is a target date to cut off the old login. If anybody has any difficulties doing this transition, and there have been some glitches, please contact us. Please contact your account representative or me directly. byoung@4d.com. Be glad to make sure that happens for you. The summit. We are 7 months away from summit time, and we are about to send out the call for presentations, call for papers, to see if anybody in the community has some bright ideas they'd love to talk about, or even if you don't, talk to us and let's see if there's something that you could present that would really be helpful to the community. We have, as before in the last summit, anybody who is accepted to present will be given a free registration for the 2 main summit days. And this year, we're pretty excited about it being in DC. It's not only an exciting location, it's also going to be a great time of the year to be there. We expect the cherry blossoms to be in bloom. We have a pretty good, pretty unbeatable room rate for the city for a midweek stay. I don't know if y'all are used to looking at DC for a location, but midweek is usually pretty pricey, and we've gotten that price down. And if anybody's interested in extending their stay, please take a look at the Summit site, because there are also rates for people. If you're prepared to put money down now in a non-refundable registration, you can get even lower rates that include the weekends. So take a look at that if you're at all interested in going to the Summit this year. Advanced training on the third day. In the past, so somebody's asking, what is advanced training on the third day? In previous summits, in recent previous summits, we've had the 2 main summit days plus a pre-class and a post-class. Those pre-classes and post-classes are considered advanced training. We're not ready to publish what the topics are going to be, but for instance, last year on both the pre and post-class, we had 3 to 5 speakers going in depth on some topics that you don't normally get to hear about. That's outside of the main summit registration. So the main summit is on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, with this year advanced training being Thursday. You could also call that a post-class. Hope that answered your question, Tim. Okay, so we got me all stumbled here. No, it didn't answer the question. What is advanced training? You're asking what the topics are. Yes, so I do accept that we are talking about registering for the summit and booking a room without knowing what the advanced training topics are. I want to get those published as soon as possible, but we are not prepared to do that right now. If you're a regular to the
has it ever been bad?
Exactly. If you're a regular to the summit, then you're a regular to the summit. If this is something you need to be tempted by, I hope to get that information out very soon. But this is going to be an exceptional summit. Not only is it in a great city, not only is it going to be on the East Coast, which we haven't had for a while, so it's going to be easier access for many of our community. It is also shaping up to be a great summit for content. You've already gotten a little bit of a hint of it through the R4 beta that was released recently, and things like the object, I'm going to trip over this, object dot notation. So we're really excited about what we're going to be able to share this time, and I can't wait to take the sheet off of that, those topics. Okay. So that's the summit. Please take a look at it. You can go to events.4d.com and you can read up on what's published, and we'll be publishing more. For product versions, just like last 4DMethod meeting 6 weeks ago, the same product versions are available, which is V16R3 and V16 Hotfix 2, but we are working diligently to get the next versions out. There will be announcements on that soon. Both in the dot release line and the R release line is pretty predictable these days. And finally, the last thing I want to leave you with, we've talked about this on the road show. I don't think we've talked about it at the 4DMethod meeting, but we have a new pricing option. If you have clients that are looking at starting new projects, we have a subscription model pricing available today that for a lot of sense, especially if your clients are looking to get the upfront cost down. So if you have any questions about that, please talk to us. We're not changing our other pricing models. We're just adding a possible subscription model to our pricing. Okay, thank you, Brent.
Okay, thank you. And I guess you mentioned a little bit about V16R4 and that it would have a predictable release date. Do you have any more hints on that? Because I, for one, am dying to use it, and I don't say that lightly, because there's not every version that there's so much that I'm interested in. But with this one, it's really piling up for the things that I could use today. So do you have any inside scoop on when that might be?
Well, we're smart enough not to announce things that we can't know, but the release schedule, we've been on a 3 to 4 month schedule pretty predictably, ever since we started the R release line. So if you take a look, it was released to beta about 2 months ago, I believe. So we're looking at about another month, and provided that there's no gotchas, you can count on it being available pretty soon. Does that
Okay.
answer without committing us to something we can't control, which is weather and bugs?
Yes, I'm about as happy as Tim was, I think, but that's good. No, it's in getting back to what's in R4. I mean, 16 itself and the R versions have been really great with their building out of the object usage in the language and in the data structure. Currently, with R4, we get the object dot notation. Got one more question for you guys while I have you hedging all of your answers. I noticed with the object dot notation as I was testing around with R4, it wasn't thread safe for preemptive processes. Do you know if it's planned to actually be preemptive, or is it going to be at least initially released as non-thread safe?
I'm forgetting the discussions we've had. It's been a couple months since I looked deeply into that. We're well aware of the issue. I'm going to slip out in the meeting, see if I can get a better answer for you.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. I decided to throw that in while it was on my mind. But otherwise, we get a couple of new variable types. One called collections, which is a sort of a special kind of array of objects or basically any variable type, which is which some commands are already using in the language with the new R4 version. We get a way to validate JSON based on a schema, which is nice. We get null variable types, which of course you'll need if you're going to be playing anywhere outside the sandbox of 4D. And also now you're able to store pictures as object attributes. And just another quick question, if anyone knows, and feel free to answer, perhaps see if anyone could tell us in the Q&A later, how those are stored. Are they base 64 encoded? Can you just share them freely as far as that's concerned, or is it some kind of special encoding in the for the picture? But anyways, definitely everybody is going to want to check out as more and more features come down the pipe for the R versions. And a place to check it out is what I'll be talking about in this new segment called What the Blog. So this year, and I think it was last year when it was first really introduced, and they started putting a lot of effort into the 4D blog at blog.4d.com. And I've found it to be very handy, a very good place to go look for news about what's happening with 4D and new functionality. And now more and more I'm seeing that they're also adding in kind of tech-nodey, demo database-y, knowledge-based kind of articles. And so I figured this goes pretty well along with what's to know in the knowledge base. Well, it's now, some of that is now in the blog. So to cover a couple of them, the latest ones, there was an interesting demonstration of how you can use you can hook up your 4D system to a big screen display via a Raspberry Pi, which is kind of it's an educational tool, but it's very popular amongst the maker crowd and for doing any sort of creative mashups of technology. So you're able to take a large display, hook it into the Raspberry Pi, which makes calls to your 4D system and displays the SVG graphics or otherwise on a large dashboard. So that would be a pretty cool thing to have at a corporate headquarters or depending on what your uses are. It's just an interesting exercise for thinking about how you could expose the content out of 4D. There's also a nice demo of using Google Charts in 4D. There's also new functionality for controlling tips, not only the ability to turn them on and turn them off and to set them, but also to set the delay and the duration of the tip when you're hovering over a button or other form object. There's also an interesting new functionality called Get Process Activity, which returns a couple of collections that you're able to access and show in-depth detail about the processes that are running on your machine and the sessions that the server is controlling. And that's pretty neat. It shows you how you can use that information to make your own kind of server administration window. So yeah, so everybody check out the blog. They're doing a really good job sharing information there, which is always nice. It's the first place I see information about new features that are coming, and they're very well presented, and I think it's been a really good place for 4D to go with that information. So check it out. Next, we'll get some news about what's been going on in the world of Wakanda from Zhang Lu, the technical services engineer at 4D. Thanks, Zhang.
Thanks, Brent. Hey, everyone. So 4D Mobile and Wakanda team has been really busy. We just released Wakanda 2.1.0 on both community and enterprise version at the end of July, exactly a month ago. This is the first major release since we moved to incrementing versioning in version 2. So 2.1, 2.0, this second digit means that's the first major release. We had 2.0.1, 2.0.3. The third digit stands for in both studio and server. So for example, on this, just a sec. For example, can you hear us okay?
We had a quiet moment there where it looked like your lips were moving.
Oh, really? Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I was just mentioning that this is 2.1.0 is our first major release since version 2, and has so in the studio and server all received some new features. I want to point out a couple of key features for those who are interested. Studio now supports tests. The test modules are built based on Matcha and Chai. So in addition to a run in the studio, you can actually just click test. There's a test function in the studio. You can just click test, and the studio would run the test for you. And then there's more configurations added to Wakanda settings where you can configure your Android packages and your environment variables, which inside studio, you don't really have to go to system settings anymore. And the third one,
oops, dropping out again.
Oh, I get it. Okay, so I think it's gonna be better now. So Brian was working on the keyboard. That somehow to
step away from the keyboard and keep your hands in plain view.
So Wakanda Studio now has a command line tool built in where you can actually type in commands to change your live settings of studios, say like change certain features, certain settings, and like IP addresses stuff. And the last one is the biggest one in the studio is now we opened the template inside Studio where you can create your own project templates. So as you're probably familiar with Wakanda knows that when you create a project, you can select a template for your project, say Angular 1, Angular 2, Angular 4, or you have a custom templates. Now we have fully supported custom templates where you can build it with other frameworks. And so that's on the studio side. On the server side, now we've updated our Node.js core to v6.10.2 LTS, and then we added a couple modules into server. One it being Threadify, and then we added several new APIs to work on the internal storages. And we also on system workers, we now not only allows you to write scripts to access terminal. We actually have a terminal simulator inside of Wakanda server where you can actually simulate a terminal inside of it. So these are the several new features I want to just highlight, and there's more minor changes and bug fixes, and some of the new features do require you to migrate and upgrade your solutions. So please feel free to check out GitHub, and both community and enterprise versions are released and stable, and the 2.1.0 is certified with 4D Mobile. So that's it from me. Thanks, Brent.
Okay, thank you, John. That was a lot going on there. There's always a lot of action in Wakanda, and it's a world that moves very fast, and have to keep up with the with the demands of web development and web consumers out there. So thanks so much for the update. Next, we have the 4D iNug e-Digest from Ed Hammond, where Ed reviews some of the recent discussion that's happened on the iNug. So I'll hand it over to you, Ed. Thanks.
Thanks, Brent. As always, the iNug is a wealth of information that you can draw upon. There's developers there that have been active with 4D for well over 30 years. Well, I can't say well over 30 years, over 30 years. And even they can learn new tricks. I'm going to start off with a subject about wiki software that David Adams started. It was a discussion about various wiki and issue tracking systems and how the development community uses them. And if you're interested in using that type of a system, he started with Confluence, but there were some other options put forth by other members of the community. And I know right now at the Art Institute, we're using Redmine for our issue tracking. So if you're interested in that sort of discussion, look it up. On the subject of old dogs learning new tricks, we've got several old timers that asking questions about stuff. So much has been added to the 4D environment that it's hard to keep up with. So Tony Rinksmith was looking for a function to return the date and time of the next scheduled backup. Apparently there's a command that would is built in now that would give them that. You no longer have to parse the XML, the backup XML to get that information. Douglas Van Roter was looking for a very simple way to access the server with 2 copies of remote. Apparently he hadn't done that before, and many of us are doing it, and he found a solution to that. And David Adams was looking for a case-sensitive replace string. What do you know? It was built in. David Adams also had a thread of thinking through the object and text fields, and his findings would be his findings have summarized, and that was an interesting thread. Obviously, everybody's still digging into objects and how to use them. Peter Jacobson started a thread on arrays versus objects for key value pair lookups. And if you're have a need for those sort of structures, that's an interesting discussion. Couple of tips were posted. One by David Adams, finding scheduling conflicts, which pertains to code to do date math interval searches. And that thread, that posting includes code to do that. And Alan Udy, I'm guessing that pronunciation, UDY, had a tip on database settings, publishing info for the IP address when he was doing an update apparently that IP address was not included in the database settings. So you had to add that back in. There was also a component update. The object module from Canon Smith has been updated with a function to object get array size. And that was from a request from Douglas Van Roter. And that will be my summary of the digest for the month, and I will relinquish the rest of my time to David Adams.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, this Ed puts a lot of work into reviewing all those discussions, and you can check out some of his the points that he mentions and follow links to the discussions on the 4DMethod site under eDigests. So check it out and register up to get involved in the NUG with the links that you see here on the slide. So thanks again, and we'll move on to the next segment called Hey 4D. So Hey 4D, we have an expression pane in the debugger and the Runtime Explorer where you can, say, highlight some text and bring up a contextual menu where you can copy it to the expression pane, or even just hover over it and it will automatically evaluate it. But there's no good way to evaluate an expression in the method editor itself, and let alone anything with constants, which would be really cool. How about a contextual menu or a tip for the method editor? And that'd be a lot cooler if we did have that. So yeah, if you have some ideas that you'd like to suggest, check out this knowledge base article about how to submit them to the 4D forum. Be sure to convert your forum login to the 4D store login before that cutoff date, as Brian had mentioned. So yeah, and I will turn over the rest of my time to our special guest today, David Adams. He's one of the most prolific contributors in the 4D community, and has been for many years now, certainly most of the time that I've been involved. He's joining us from Australia he's got a background in writing, as many of us have probably noticed, but he's been programming for about 20 years. During this time, he's been an IT director, a network manager, a trainer, an in-house developer, an outside consultant, inside consultant, sideways consultant, and along the way, he's published 4 books and dozens of articles, and probably half of the NUG on fourth dimension programming subjects. He's written about a dozen trainings and delivered them to audiences in over 10 countries, and I'd be willing to bet that most people watching this have probably seen them in person and are well familiar with his contributions. And most current 4D developers and over the years have looked to David for good coding practices and commentary on general 4D development. And yeah, if anyone in the world of 4D has achieved official guru status, it is certainly David Adams. So welcome to you, and looking forward to your special topic demo on a published subscribed component for 4D.
All right. Well, thanks for that intro. I will fail to live up to that. But that's nice to hear. Let's see. So, all right. Now it looks like you're looking at my screen. Let's find out.
Yep.
I got 2 screens here. Brent and I did a little bit of a sound check earlier. So, oh, wrong version of 4D. I'm just using 16.1 for this because it doesn't need anything later. I have to say, though, the new releases are just getting better and better. I mean, there's more and more stuff in them. And R4 looks pretty interesting. Yeah, so you can see my screen. Now, is that resolution going to work, or is that way too small?
Well, bigger text is always better if that's doable.
Yeah, should have thought of this sooner.
But
yeah, there's always. All right, so
for me.
Let's go to displays, and let's make this one scale to that. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, let's try that then.
Okay.
People are having problems, you know, well, deal with it. No, shout. Okay. Hey, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that came up earlier in tonight's presentation. And thanks for doing it at night. I didn't want to get up at 2 in the morning. I'm just piggish that way. Yeah, just to echo what Brent said, the blog is really good. And I keep bugging 4D to post about the blog on the Nug, but I guess either they don't or I keep missing it. But it's technical marketing material, if you haven't seen it, which I mean in the good sense, which is, you know, it's a little bit glossy and pretty, but it's also technical, and they give you databases and sample code and ideas, and I really like it. Every time, I never regret going to look at it. So I really encourage people to visit it, and I'm glad that Brent's including that in the 4DMethod meetings as another kind of reminder. And let's see, I think most people that have looked at it would agree with what Brent and I said. And Zhang, whose name I'm sure I'm mangling your pronunciation because I suck. Before the meeting started, we said hello because we hadn't met, and I asked what he did, and so he told me he works on 4D Mobile, and I said, oh, API that you can't use because it's undocumented. And he just sort of grimaced, as you would expect. And I said, no, I don't mean that in a bad way. That's just how everyone talks about it. And he said something I thought was really smart. He reframed the whole thing for me. He said, no, you know, Wakanda's got a well-documented, several years old open API, which can use 4D as a backend. So connect to the Wakanda API and then just leave all the plumbing to the Wakanda API, so it's just a connector. And put that way, it's like, right, that makes total sense. Because I know 4D guys, we're all used to kind of tinkering with everything in 4D, but if you're using any kind of web system, you're forever talking to some library or module, and behind the scenes, who knows what it's doing? You know, it connects one way or another, and it can change between versions. You don't know, you don't care, and you're grateful. So I think that's probably the right way to think about 4D Mobile, is that it's something that you would use a connector's API for, instead of having to reverse engineer the actual REST components, because it sounds like they depend on quite a bit of context, which you need a connector to handle for you. So I just thought I'd mention that because I've heard about this over the years, and I never really thought of it that way. I mean, I might have missed it, but there it is. And the last thing was on Ed's summaries. Those are nice. I like listening to those. They're fun. It is kind of interesting to hear a 6-week slice of the Nug. About the interval math, so like checking for schedule conflicts, intervals just to start and an endpoint on a line. So it could be numbers of any kind, including dates and times. There's a better algorithm, or an more optimized algorithm called interval trees, which is a specialized use of a kind of a B tree. And I've been posting some links on that. So if anybody ever needs to do intensive but efficient schedule conflict detection or analysis, that's like the tool. So that's up there in the archives. Sometimes I post things just so they're in the archives, so that, well, frankly, so I can look them up later.
Yeah, that's great. And I saw that earlier today, and it will be on the links on the 4DMethod website. Oh,
cool. All right. So today, what I was going to talk about is something called publish subscribe. I don't know, show of hands. People familiar with publish subscribe from other systems? It's usually spelled publish capital P / subscribe capital S because it's a pattern. Yeah. Well, it's a thing. So patterns. I bet most people have heard this phrase, such and such pattern, like the model view controller pattern, or the singleton pattern, or the singleton anti-pattern. If you're on the right mailing lists and forums, you'll see people being told, you ignorant slut, that's an anti-pattern. You're garbage. So the deal with patterns is I don't think people necessarily understand what they are and where they come from. The word is consciously adopted from a series of architecture books that were led by a man named Alexander in the 1970s from Berkeley, and it was called a pattern language, a timeless way of building. And it was sort of a community-involved architecture project out of Berkeley, and it's one of the more influential architecture books of the 20th century. So if you have architect friends, say you know what it is, and they will just be amazed. And how it worked was they'd say, well, a sunroom is a kind of a pattern. There's like a general set of properties that a sunroom would have, like it has to be facing towards the sun, depending on your hemisphere, or a sewing room, it might need a certain kind of lighting or a certain kind of arrangement of objects. So they said, well, these are patterns, like a town square is a pattern. And so they tried to describe these things not as plans, not blueprints, which is a work product of an architect, but as sort of general designs that have to be worked through. So, well, these are the trade-offs and this is sort of the balance we'll come to. Well, the pattern movement in architecture and networking and computers kind of went back and forth. So there were a bunch of fellas that came up with the concept of object patterns. The object-oriented programming started, well, as one person said, as a clever use of libraries. But then once the programming was well developed, object-oriented analysis and design came on top of it. And so they consciously took this notion of a pattern, which is a general design template, not a blueprint, not an exact plan, and they applied it to objects. And the people that did that, you know them in their work. Some of those people are the ones that created extreme programming and what became Agile, more or less. Martin Fowler, who's quite a wonderful writer and one of those incredibly smart people that makes complicated subjects sound simple. They are the people that kind of started all this. So when you talk about a pattern like model view controller or publish subscribe or singleton, or there's hundreds of them, it's not an exact algorithm. It's somewhere between an algorithm and an implementation. It's something else. So anytime you see comments on a pattern like publish and subscribe, you find that people are usually talking about a specific implementation that they're familiar with, be it in a framework from Apple or from Microsoft or Google or any of the other titans of industry that create software these days. So what we've got here is a publish and subscribe pattern for 4D. And here, I'll just show you something it kind of does. And let's just start with that. People that have seen my demos know I'm not really a demo guy. So what I have here is a pretty standard, totally standard 4D window, right? I've got it's a monitor window, so things are going to get appear and disappear over time, right? So I've got these services, like you might have, I don't know, whatever your system does, really. Maybe you have a printing service, or maybe you have some kind of a drop folder check service. You could be doing anything. And then these services have attributes. So it's just things with attributes. And there's really nothing special about this window. Okay. It's built into this little component I'm going to use. So let's take a look here. Oh yeah, wrong database. I'll open the other one. I have two databases, and I've already sent them over to Brent. And one is a source database for a component, and that's this one. And then I compile it so it runs a little faster. And there's less that than it's less the speed than just that there's just so much code in there, because I get paid by the method, so I like to write lots of little methods. So let's see. No, that's not the right one. What? Here we go. Worked at home. No, this thing isn't actually really done. I'll get into that. Parts of it are completely fine working. So here I'll run the monitor over here. Oh, come on up. I have two screens, and one of them is not working. There we go. Come on. There we go. So now I'm calling the component, and it's going to run that window. So we'll just open that up. Okay. Let's get my monitor window open. Do it this way. Monitor process. Okay, so here are my windows again. Right, so if you saw quickly, there were about 5 services. So some of these services, for example, I want to be notified when a new service is published as a service. Those are built into this component. These other ones are from a window in my demo database, this window over here. So I've got a veterinary practice. It's made with garbage data from a little data generating site I really like, except for the procedure names, which I got from our friend down in Melbourne, Wayne, because he was a practicing vet for many, many years. So I've got this here window, and it's a pretty standard 4D window, right? I've got a client, they've got a pet, and it's a cat, and Jake came in, the cat came in for these visits to do these various things at these various times. Then I've got 2 charts using 4D's little, kind of toy chart maker. I mean, it's not, you couldn't really use it, but it's nice to have something. The cat's practice and birth year, what this is charting out is something related to the actual pet, the type of pet, the species. This chart over on the right is related to this particular list box here. So you load this record, you load the pets, you load the visits for the selected pets. You build a graph based on the selected pet. You build a graph based, the one on the right, you build a graph based on the selected visits. So it's not that big a screen, it's not that unusual, but there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of dependencies amongst all these objects, right? That sort of cascade of things happening. So do people have this kind of interface, right? I mean, in more real world terms, but that's familiar?
Yeah.
I'll take that as, yeah, okay. So that's kind of normal.
Need more cute kitty pictures, though. That's all.
More kitty pictures. There you're right.
Yeah.
Okay. So this window is not done in the usual way. Instead, it's using services. So let me just close that. Let's go look at the monitor window. See this monitor window? I'm going to close that. And then a whole bunch of services disappeared. So how to explain this? I've written, like, I can't tell you, I spent months on this. I've written, like, I don't know, well more than 100 pages, zillions of slides, and I still find it a little bit hard to come up with a clean, compelling explanation. All right, let's take a look at the form. That might be the right place to start. Here we are. So I'm here in my client form. All right, this is my detail form. Now we're looking at it, right? So when I load the form, that's where you'd expect to see pretty much all the code, right? Let's see, there's the method. Okay, so yeah, client load pets. That makes sense. We come into the client. I mean, you could have it auto load, right? But I'm having it by code. Client load pets. And just as a reminder, that's going to do a whole bunch of stuff. I think I've got a little diagram I can show you for that. Let me just grab it here. Can't see what I'm doing, but believe me, I'm doing something. Okay, there. I split all my slides into individual pages so I can grab the ones I want as I go through, depending on context. All right, so, and there we go. No, that's it. There we go. So this little diagram here breaks down the components of this this form. You got the client, you got the visit list, you got the pet list, you got the pet graph, and you got the procedure graph. And these things are connected, right? When you hit the client, it has to, the client loads the pet list loads the visit list, and the pet graph. And the visit list loads the procedure graph. So there's all these sort of interconnections around on the form. Now, here's the thing. If you normally do this in 4D, what you would normally do is you would have the, either automatically or have the form load the client, pets. So it would load this. Then you would have this or some subroutine load that. And then you would have them load these graphs. So there'd be a lot of entanglement amongst these various object scripts. There'd be a lot of what's called why am I blanking on the word? Help me out.
Having a lot of centralized code for the dependencies.
No, the normal word for entanglement is actually coupling. That's coupling. So you'd have a lot of coupling between these objects, right? So if you took this object off the form, some other part of the form would break. You know, like this thing would break because it's expecting to set this thing here and then nothing happens. Right. So the normal way you do this is quite a bit of code. In this case, all the form did was load the pets. And when this gets set, when you click on an item there, all that happens is that a little method's called saying that a pet was set. So that means there was a pet selected. And all it does is creates a little empty object, pretty much. And it says, okay, there's a pet's been set with this ID. And I'm going to send a message out to the world saying, this event happened, a pet was set. And here's the payload. In this case, the payload is just the UID, so you could look up the pet, but you could include other information like its name or whatever if you wanted to save yourself a lookup, right? So that's up to you. That's why an object's a good format for that. Just saying where it's from in case someone cares. And that it's going to be service notify on SetPet. Now, what is all that about? Well, the idea is that when you click here, you're going to click on this. This thing is going to send out an event. It's like you've got your own custom event. It's going to send out an event that says a pet was clicked. Now, who is that event sent to? Let's take a look at the addressing. Oops, sorry, wrong form. There we go. Client on SetPet. I'm sending the message. I'm publishing it. If you look into this, you'll see there is no address list. It's not sent to anyone. It's not sent to any of the other objects. The truth is that this here, this list box that shows the visits related to the pet, it needs to know every time a pet is clicked so that it can refresh itself with the correct list of visits, right? You don't want to have, Chester the turtle is clicked and you're still showing, Roger the cat. Likewise, this right here it's a completely stupid graph. It doesn't really mean anything, but it graphs some data. That it's not this is a bogus data set. But anyway, the graph needs to update based on the species of the pet, showing how many pets in the practice are cats and relative to all pets, or how many instead it's turtles. So okay, how many turtles? So these two things need to receive notification, and this is the thing that's responsible for sending notification. Now, the normal way to do that in 4D is that you would have this guy here, the pet, drive the process by actually triggering or running this code directly. So there would be a direct link between these things. And likewise with this graph. So this would go here, you'd click that, and then over here, it would render the graph. So this guy would be driving the process. And likewise, you would then need to know that, well, okay, now there's another dependency, which is if you click on a visit or you select the first one with code, which is what's happening here, then it needs to drive this graph, which is showing how old was that pet at the time that this procedure was performed relative to other pets receiving that procedure. So is it very old to be getting, whatever, is it very young to be getting a cancerous growth removed, or is it very normal, or is it quite old to even be around? So these dependencies can really tangle up your code. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I load the form from going from previous record, and then this thing isn't set, so then I have to not run this bit of code, or, oh, I'm coming from the output form, or, oh, they clicked on this object, so I really need to just update that thing, but in this other situation, they click on something and I need to update these two things. Is this ringing a bell with the kind of complexities you can run into with UI management?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So this is a well-known problem, okay? It was sorted out in the 1980s as how to deal with this. And anybody that's dealt with model view controller, this is that was one of the patterns. And modern view controller has a lot of variants, model view controller, and so on. But anyway, but at the heart of a lot of them is this thing called publish and subscribe. And how it works is, instead of having direct linkages between these things, you have this thing send out a message, a notification, an event saying, this happened. They clicked on a new pet, and there's the ID of the pet. There might be one subscriber, there might be 1,000, there might be none. It might change from second to second, and it doesn't matter. This object over here says, oh, I want to know when the pet changes, because when the pet changes, I need to take care of business. I need to reload things. And then this thing independently also says, I also want to know about that, because I'm going to update myself every time there's a new pet selected. And all the information I need, either one of these needs for that, is the ID of the pet, and they'll look it up. But again, you can send a richer object. If you have worked with virtually any other language, you've dealt with this kind of thing before. Okay, so what we do is we inject a new layer into the system, which is an object message broker. So what happens is, on SetPet, you have a thing which my component is called the message hub. And what it does is it is the source, or sorry, it is the target for all of the messages. So you click on a pet. The message is sent up here to the message hub, which is a discrete process. In fact, it's running as a worker, a single instance worker. The reason it's a worker is because it can receive messages using 4D's messaging schemes. So inside the message hub itself is the owner, the unique owner of the subscription list. So it knows that the visit list, this guy, and the pet graph, this guy, so both these guys want to get copies of the message. So you're adding a layer of complexity, right? But it's a simplifying complexity. The pet list, all it knows about is itself. This is like the dictum that drives all this. The thing knows about itself. It doesn't know anything about the outside world more than necessary. The thing knows about itself, and that's it. So the pet list, it knows, okay, I provide this service. I notify the world when a new pet is clicked. I send a message up to the message hub. I'm done. That's it. You can add new form objects. You can remove form objects. You could create, a whole bunch of new stuff. Doesn't matter. I'm done. The message hub is responsible for keeping track of what services are available and managing subscriptions. So the visit list says, in order to function, I need to be getting a live feed of the pets changed. So it says, when I start up, I'm going to subscribe to that service called, whatever it's called, on-click pet. So then the message hub, every time a pet is clicked, it gets notification, and it handles the distribution list and forwarding the messages. So that could be in the current window, could be in a different window in the same process. It could be in a different window in a different process. It could be to a log process that doesn't even have a window. It could be on another machine. Now, the other machine part of it, which would actually be really pretty straightforward to do. I built into the design of this, but I spent a couple of months on this, ran out of time, and now I moved on. So I won't go back and add that. But if anybody ever got into this and wanted to, I can talk to you about it quite happily. I'll tell you exactly what to do and where the hooks are. What you would end up doing is having a separate copy of the message hub running on each client and use execute on client, which, by the way, is a super efficient command now. To be the intermediary. So let's look at the demo again for a second. Okay, so right now here's my monitor. These services are built in. They're the kind of services you would need to have inside the message hub. So you want to be able to, this case, one of the services, please send me a notice every time a new service is published. That's for this window, basically, right? Every time there's a new service published, a message is sent to this window. This window, while it's part of the component, it's not part of it has no secret private access to the message hub data. It only can communicate with the message hub like anyone else through API calls. So every time a service is added, it's registered with the message hub, and the message hub then looks and sees if anyone wants to be notified about a new service being published. This particular window does because it's running. It gets sent a message and updates itself. Same with unpublish. And then there's a couple of utility callback routines to get information about services. Now, when I go over here to, let's go and find my code for starting this process. Let's see, I'll put it here. Yeah, there we go. Oh, okay, that didn't work for obvious reasons. Okay. So this is just everybody's got their own how to open a window thing. So here's one of mine. So here we go. We're opening a client process. So this is the guts of what we care about. The rest of this is standard open window code. So however you do your open window code, same. This is the part that's different. Client, setup, publish, and subscribe. So what it does here is it clears out any cruft that might have built up. I'll get rid of that. Clears out any cruft that might have built up. And it says, I'm going to publish a new service. Client publish on SetPet. And it does a whole bunch of junk. Oh, I use custom constants. For anyone that doesn't use custom constants, now they're great. And they really make it easier to work with objects. Instead of using element names as quoted strings. Whoops, somebody typed that wrong. I tell you, you get these new MacBooks, the keyboards are just horrifically bad. Anyway, so I use a tokenized, nicely underlined custom constant. Canon Smith did some nice custom constant code for doing it with the language rather than 4D pop, and it's fantastic. So I roped him into doing a tech note together, and we put together a demo database. I think that was published recently. I can't keep track. Yeah, that's super helpful. It really changed how I work with 4D and made me happy about constants for the first time since they were introduced in 6.5. So let's see. So anyway, so you publish this service. It's an object with a bunch of attributes. It defines how the service works, you know, so on. You can dig into that if you're really curious. What it does is it says, oh, you know what? It's one of these things. Sometimes my mouse goes weird. Oh, I'm going to have to quit 4D and go back in. This has nothing to do with 4D. I'd like to blame them for everything, but in this case, it's not them. Something goes weird with my mouse. There we go. So anyway, back here, we're publishing this, we're starting up this service for the vet client window. And we are going to try to open this. Yep, we succeeded. And it's not really a lot of code in there. It just says publish an event message. And all messages go through the message hub. So it's going to get there. And then it's got a bunch of code inside it and knows what to do. If you're curious, you can dig into all that. The basic idea is that a window, there is a generic or a generalized message broker, which can be used to register services, to find out about registered services, to send messages to services, and to subscribe and unsubscribe. And once you've subscribed, you're on the notification list, so you will automatically get notification. So going back to my client process window, when I go here, there's my setup, publish, and subscribe. All right, I put a breakpoint here. All right, let's go and start up the monitor process. The monitor process is a little bit of an eat your own dog food kind of thing because it, oh boy, these things I have to, because again, it uses the actual API built into the message hub. All right, so that's running now. These are the built-in services, so they'll always show up. When I go and start up the client process, there's two services. There's publishing that this was clicked and publishing that was clicked. And then there's a couple of subscribers. This is a publisher of one service, but it's also a subscriber to that was clicked. And these are each subscribers. You'll notice these graphs have zero code on them. They're just variables. So we start this up.
Just like to mention that we will put links up on the 4DMethod site for all of the source code, the demo and the component. And if you notice within the methods that David's clicking through, he's really added some terrific comments in the code. And it's not, you know, there's a lot going on there, but there's a lot of conversational almost comments, not only in the demo code, but also in some of the framework methods that he's included with the source. So definitely encourage you, even if you aren't going to implement such a strategy, which is definitely interesting. You know, go in and check out some of the comments and his comments about his coding approach. So yeah, back to you.
Can I ask one question?
Please, I love questions.
Well, this isn't about the code. I know you're moving everything around to get things set up for the demo.
Yeah.
If there's anything you want us to read, the image isn't resolving right away. You might want to just give us an extra beat to have a chance to read it.
Oh, good point. Thanks for that. All right. So walking through this code here, if you can see it. So I published the first service, which is called Vet Client Service on SetPet. That's the one where you click on a pet and a message gets propagated out to the world. Okay. So it showed up here in this window. So then we'll go on to this, and these guys are subscribing to the pet. So that's the various objects on the form that need to know about when the set pet happens. So if I just refresh this, you can see there's 3 subscribers. I don't have it propagate out when subscription lists change. I didn't even want to put out a subscription count, but it was helpful for debugging. And how it's working is, what's really getting sent around are just these little objects. These little object messages. So let's go on here. Now, I'm going to publish one more. There you go. So I said publish on get pet, which is the one for the other list box. So what happens is you get all this gunk that comes out here, right? This is what the Message Hub monitor window is receiving. So going back down to one of these diagrams. So when I when I publish this service, a message gets sent up to the Message Hub. And then in this case, it was sent off to that monitor window. The monitor window catches the message and updates itself. So now we have a 7th service. So a piece of code sends a message. It goes to the Message Hub. The Message Hub distributes it. Windows or processes catch the message, interpret it, and act on it. And how they interpret and act on it is entirely up to them.
What attributes of that object are required? Are all those required, or are those just extra messages or extra info?
Well, the message header is really routing information. So some of that is a little bit optional. Some of it was with having the foreign machine distribution in mind. The payload is pretty much all required, and that's all pretty thoroughly documented. So I don't remember off the top of my head what exactly. And it's something you could change. It's all in there. So anyway, I'll just let that finish loading. There. So a bunch more messages came through. And you wouldn't need to make them this flabby. They could be a lot more compact. All right. So now we've got all of the services and subscribers. So now the client window works. So again, now I'm gonna go to the last one. All right, that's some kind of cat. Let's see, a dog. So if I click on, this is a cat currently selected with 20 visits. Now I'm gonna just use the arrow, move down. Now I've got a dog with 3 visits. So you can see that the charts are changing, that the list is changing, and it's pretty fast, right? Now, who can read these graphs? They're way too small, right? They're totally tiny. So I'm gonna say, you know what? Too small. The client says, yeah, that's exactly what we asked for, but we don't like it. So I don't think any of you probably ever had clients like that. I've had a couple. You do what they want, and then they say, it's not perfect. Isn't that shocking? So that's okay. That's why we use a tool which is great at prototyping and delivering at the same time. So let's see now. If I go down here and say, all right, they want a new window that has these graphs, but it keeps them in sync. So if they click on a cat here, the graph is going to change in this other window in this other process. That sounds kind of hard, right? And could be kind of hard. In this case, it's super easy. I'll show you what a finished version looks like. Let's see now. I must have a demo in here somewhere. Oh yeah, client pet. Clients. Client. There we go. And let's see if we can figure out which one's which. Must be a process. Yeah, here we go. So again, process opening window. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to, again, subscribe to these particular services, namely when was a visit or a pet selected. And all they're going to get is the same message, which is just this UUID of the selected pet. That's it. That's all they get. So when I fire it up, I've decided, yeah, we'll have pie charts because, you know, they're universally garbage chart, but people really like them. So, you know, why not? So you can see, and you could change the colors and the type and everything else you want about it. This is the one for the visit. See, I changed the colors there. So now watch this. I'll move this window a little bit. Maybe I can scoot it over. here. All right. So when I click on a pet, it propagates through a change in the everything, really, if I change the species type. You see how that just worked automatically? Here I've got, I guess it's a scatter plot, and here I've got a bar chart, but they're charting the same data over in this window. Same with this one. That's it. They're all just linked together, just magically, pretty magically. There's really not much code. Here, I'll go over here. If we go to the, I prepared this form. Here's the form that showed the new process. There's 2 pages, and they have the, they've got some variables. I think there might be a method in here. Let me look. Yeah, there must be a method. Oh, maybe not, actually. I'm not sure. Let's find out. No, there's no form method. So it's just a form is just a display space. That's it. All the code is in the message handler. When you have a message handling system, you need to have a method to capture the message. And this is actually kind of a great feature because of what you can do. So when I opened up that process and subscribed, I set a graph handler, which is client pet graph pet type handler GP, which is just an abbreviation for this process. So when I go in there, this is where the message goes to. Here, I'll do this. We'll just set a breakpoint so that when I click on a pet, that we should get a breakpoint in the second process because of the message arriving. I'm going to get rid of this window. We don't need it. Okay, so when I click here on one of the other pets, we should get a breakpoint in the other window. Yeah, here it comes. I've never actually done this, but this is how it should work. So here we are, and we are in the process. Don't click those too fast, you will crash 4D. Okay, so current. Oh, I love this command. Client process for graphs. So we're in the other window now. If I go through here, all this method does, all any of the message handlers do ever is receive a message, receive an object parameter $1. So you can do whatever you want. It's a really good use of an object parameter because you can pass it around blindly and generically, but then change the content however you want. And you can see how simple this is. Let me just get this so it's a little bit better formatted. Here. 18, 24. So all this stuff is message header stuff that you pretty much don't need to care about because that's all done by the framework or the component, right? What it is where's it from, who sent it, what happened. The tag is actually like a callback tag for anyone that's used callbacks so that you could distinguish amongst different events because you could have one message handler that a method that handles multiple types of messages. And this is the payload. It's just the ID of the pet. And again, you could have put the ID or what have you in there. If anyone's used JavaScript, you'll see these absolutely ginormous kind of like objects they pass around. Maybe like 2 pages, 3 pages if you print it out. They don't have an embedded database. We have an embedded database. So I tend to like to look stuff up. Sometimes for efficiency reasons, or just it's a hassle. You've already got the data. You just pack it right in there. And that's fine. That's a personal call. So it gets that message there, and it processes it. All it's doing here is saying, you know, I really want to change the pet type, the chart type to a pie chart. So I'm just going to add a new parameter to the object, just sort of add onto it. And then I'm going to call exactly the same handler method that is used in the main window. So I'm getting to reuse virtually all the code, but I can override the parts that I want to tweak, like the colors and other graph attributes and what have you. You can get into infinite loops pretty fast with debug windows. So is that making some sense?
Yeah, it certainly makes sense to me. I was trying to understand in that
let's get some questions. Go.
In that message header, maybe that answer this, but say you have two what is that lower left list? That's pets, and then you have.
Yeah, this is the list of pets right here.
Yeah. So say you have 2 different lists of pets, and you
Uh-huh.
have 2 different lists of visits. Can the
Uh-huh.
visits subscribe to a particular pet list so that you can change one visit list and not change another visit list?
Yeah, sure. I hadn't thought of that, but that'd be really easy. I'll bring up the, what you would do is you're not subscribing to the list. You're subscribing to a service. So each list would have a separate service.
Okay, so each parent
They would
list
be
has its own
different-
service
They would
name.
be different publishers. They would be publishing 2 different things. They could be, on click pet 1 and on click pet 2, or on click pet, keep static, or non click. You could have one that's, I always want to see yesterday, and I want to see whatever's coming in the door, or something like that. Yeah, it'd be easy. You just have multiple services.
Cool.
Yeah. Oh, and
I
actually,
have a question.
yeah, go ahead. Who's talking?
Tim Nevels.
Hey, Tim.
Hello. This is all very interesting, and I'm really enjoying this, how you got this all laid out. But I'm curious about kind of what's happening under the hood. The message hub, it's basically just, is it like doing call forms and calling other process, the mechanism for it to distribute these messages out to the different windows? Is that how it's being done with call form or call process?
Man, you couldn't ask a better question. Moving on. No, that's a great question. Yeah. In fact, that's where it all started. About what year? You might remember about a year and a half ago, maybe. Thomas Mall gave a presentation on call form and call process. Call form and call window. No, wait. Call form and call worker. Right. Call form and call worker. How many? Did some of you guys see that?
I saw it.
Yeah. If you're
I
planning,
don't know what happened, but I dropped off, but I'm back now.
oh well. Okay. So here's the deal. If you are going to work with call form and call worker, and I encourage people to, I think they're really good. Here's how good I think they are. I didn't use 4Ds 14 and 15. I didn't. I used V13. It was working fine. I didn't want to deal with this ridiculous UUID mess. I just didn't want to. Nobody was going to pay me to do it. Didn't see the reason. So I skipped them. I mean, I had licenses, but I didn't use them. Then V16, I thought, well, maybe it's time, take a look again. Because, after this many years, I'd also figured, if I put 20 hours into learning 4D, I get a little bit. If I put 20 hours into learning literally anything else, I got a lot because I'm ignorant. So, I'm much more ignorant about everything else. So I got much more to gain, which is one way to look at it. But then V16 came along, and I saw Thomas's presentation, and I always like his presentations. He's really technical, but he's clear, and he gets excited, and I have a lot of respect for the work he's done over the years behind the scenes. So I tuned in, and I loved it. I thought it was great. And as it turns out, one of my areas of interest and experience happens to be distributed message and processing queues. It's something I've been doing since the 80s. I've written a bunch of them. I've used a bunch of them. I really like processing queues, etc. So I'm like, great, finally we have a message queue in 4D. You could do it in the past using NTK's interprocess channels, which is actually a pretty darn good solution. But it's like finally something native. So, I looked at his presentation, and I looked at the docs, and the documentation on the actual commands, that's excellent. The about workers is how do you say politely, it's total garbage. Is there a polite way of saying that? Total garbage, yeah. I wrote to 4 different branches of 4D offering to rewrite them for free, and I never heard back from any of them, so I took that as a no. The problem with the about workers documentation is not that it's wrong. It isn't wrong. It's a little wrong, but it's that it's right in ways that are of completely no use to us, because it's right from the point of view of 4D inside. And we're not inside 4D. We're outside 4D. So if you're going to get into call form and call worker, use the actual command references on the command names or for the commands. Watch Thomas's presentation, and the about workers thing is I think less helpful than not reading it at all, pretty much. I thought, okay, this particular queuing implementation, it has a bunch of design limits, the 4D one. So there's a lot of things I would normally use queues for that I can't. But this isn't like a bug. It's like they made some choices. And I actually thought, wow, 4D in these two commands, call worker and call form, they have packed in an amazing amount of power with great economy, right? You know, 4D, sometimes they do stuff and you're like, what, or anybody, but 4D, they do stuff like, what are they thinking? It's so complicated and weird. And other times you're like, it takes your breath away because it's like, wow, I never could have made it that simple. It's like, that is genius. So I felt this set of features kind of fell into that category, and I still do. I mean, I understand and can work with the limits, but for what it does, call form and call worker are really nice. They're just super sweet. It helps if you understand how they actually work, but they're very easy to use. They're very powerful. They're very high performance. They're great. So that is what's happening underneath. And to make that a little clearer, let me just show you one other thing, because I've been focusing on UI, which is not really my thing. UI applications. But I also have another little process here, which is called, I've got a log writer. So every time a message goes out, it gets sent to a log. See all this junk? These are all the messages. I'll turn off soft wrap. So these are the actual messages going out. All these pet things. Let me just clear that. We'll close that. Let me just get the text size up. Okay, lots of people need logs. Workers are actually potentially a very sensible way to approach log handling if you want to run in a multi-process context. So I didn't show you this earlier, but when I started up all the service subscriptions for the client process, one of them is this right here, log writer. So the log writer is its own worker. Might help if I showed the process list. Is that here? Yeah, that's where it is. So you can see here, 4D's got these nice new icons. I kind of like them. They're helpful. And it shows what type of a process it is. So you can tell, for example, in compiled mode, which ones are run preemptively and which are not. So I've got a log writer. This is a windowless background worker process, which you could run on a separate core. It's doing nothing fancy. It's just streaming information out to a disk file. So you have the log writer opens up a disk file. It receives messages through RAM messaging, so very quick, and it spits them out to disk. That's how web servers write logs. That's how servers write logs. It's just a smart way to do it. So this thing here, the log writer, is, where is it? There it is. That's it. This is all the log writer does. It just writes this thing out to disk. Nothing else. Nothing. It opens the process when it starts. It opens up this log file and stores the reference in a process variable, and that process is a worker, which is like another process with a little extra something and a little less something, and it just sends it out. That's it. It's just really simple. So how does that work? The same way everything else does. All I did was say, oh, when I start up the client window, there's something funky going on with how it's working. I really want to know every time the pet list box is clicked. I mean, you wouldn't, but just saying. So every time it's clicked, it's also going to subscribe to on SetPet, just like the graph, one of the graphs did, just like the list of visits did. So now you've got 3 subscribers. You've got on the form, I'll just show a picture. So you've got 3 subscribers. I'm not showing it here, but which would be the log writer, which would sell when this is clicked, a message goes to the message hub. The pet list still has no idea if anyone's subscribing and who they are or what they do with information. Well, one copy goes to this, one copy goes to the graph, another copy goes over to that other processor running, and another copy goes over to the log. In the case of this window, it does the update this list, update that list, and in the other window, it updates the other graph. So we've got a bunch of visual stuff. But over in the log writer, it just sends it out to disk. Free. I mean, that's costing you nothing. All you did was like a line of code to call an existing method. It's not a big deal. So if I click there, log writer comes up, right? Totally different process, no UI. going to send that out to disk. So that file is now empty. BBEbbit's usually pretty good about live saves, so we'll try that. And there you go. Well, I got some garbage. Please ignore the garbage. No idea. So underneath the hood, this is all that's really happening. This is what's being sent around, this kind of stuff. And the sender, all it's sending is tell the world this. The message broker, called the message hub in this case, the message broker keeps the subscription list and sends a copy of the same message to every subscriber. So the publisher doesn't have any idea who's subscribing. It doesn't know how the information will be used, has no control over it, it doesn't care. The message hub has no idea what's going to be done with these messages. It doesn't know what they mean. It has no intelligence of that kind. It's purely a router. So it knows, oh, I need to forward this message based on the subscription list. So, you know, this phrase, separation of concerns, this is a really good example of separation of concerns. The publisher, it knows about itself. It knows I'm the pet list. I get clicked, I send a message. The message hub, the broker, it says, I know about my data. My data is the subscription list and list of services. I know how to act on data. So I receive a message, I look it up in my routing table, and I distribute copies. But I don't know anything about who those people are. I don't know what they do. One's a log writer. One's a separate window. One's the current window, so it's getting sent back to the same form. Don't know, don't care. All I know is I have to send things. And then each of the windows does its own thing. The log writer sends this up to disk as an entry. This one, you click here. Oh, I'm going to go there. You click here, and a message goes here, which updates this list, which updates this, and which separately updates that. And then the other window, wherever it went, is updated in another way. It has its own handler. So this is not really answering Tim's question, which I'll get back to, but I did want to complete that picture because I've seen that some people, it clicks for them when they see that the exact same service is supplying the log writer with pure text and these other windows with again, pure text, but with information they can use to present information visually. Is that making anything click for people?
Yeah, and I would just, you know, from having messed around with the call worker and call form a little bit myself, I would say that, you know, call worker is representative of the message queue itself. And the call form is, at least in this case, one way or another, the execution of the callback.
Okay,
would that
look
be
at it that way?
Would that be wrong? I mean, at least, you know, in terms of those two commands.
Probably I should say something about them. When I originally envisioned this presentation, I thought, oh, well, you know, there's a big new feature in 4D. It takes about 6 months for people to get their head around it. But now there's so many big new features in 4D that it takes us even longer, so we can't keep up. So I think with this, that mostly people haven't really worked it out in detail. And I've just happened to have chosen to spend a couple of months looking at it closely, so I have. Let me, would you guys want to hear something about the actual underlying commands? Sounds like Tim does.
That and I would say, you know, this is really neat, especially for manipulating complex UIs and you know, dealing with different windows and different processes. And as you've said, it's readily extrapolatable, adaptable to multiple clients. I would be interested in, you know, because this kind of logical mentality and approach is so in use across the board with different systems and services and microservices and all of that kind of thing. You know, that the way that the systems talk to one another these days, and you know, they're not the same way that we're looking at it as different UI elements, but if you could look at each UI element as a different service in general, you know, can you think of, do you have any other ideas of how you might blow this up, this kind of approach into using multiple clients in a sort of a grid fashion, grid computing, or what kind of other crazy ideas come to mind when you have gotten into these features?
Oh, well, just the exciting next step was going to be making this work under client server. And you know how the message hub is working as a broker on an individual machine? Well, you'd also have one running on each client, like I mentioned, in the server, so that then if a client was going to subscribe to remote service, it would subscribe through its message hub. So it would really, across the network, only be message hub to message hub communication. So it would be pretty straightforward. And then the local message hub would keep a local subscriber list, and it would have to count how many subscribers there are and unsubscribe completely when there's none left, so that the message distribution wouldn't be going, to null mailboxes. And at that point, you could have, well, I imagine you had like this is just a stupid example, but let's say you had a pit with 20 phone desks, and you wanted everybody's activity. So they might have their activity showing up on their screen with their call loads and resolutions and what have you. Well, a manager or whoever could have copies of all 20 of those dashboards, or a consolidated one. They would just be getting very small messages over the network from each of the clients. So as a worker, sorry, as a staff member logged into their system, they'd show up on the dashboard back in the central office, which might be in another building. And when they logged out, they would go away.
That's cool.
Yeah. Left is an exercise of the reader, but actually, again, the design anticipates that. So it really is, it is possible. Hey, but getting back to basics for a sec, let me just show something. Okay, you know how you figure something out and you think you've got it figured out and you move forward and then you realize you missed something? Well, I went through that maybe half a dozen times with these commands. So now I think I've got a pretty good grip on them, but it did take a while. So, I guess I'd say to people, just keep pushing forward with your understanding. Probably the simplest thing to do is watch Thomas's presentation, about 45 minutes. Once you get to the part where he's, there were some AV glitches, but after that, it goes great for about 45 minutes. That, and then sit down and actually try the commands out. Just create a Scratch database. Just the simplest, dumbest thing you can do. Just look at the command reference for the commands, try them out, and you'll get a really decent, you should get a really decent mental model of how it works pretty quickly. Now, there's some more levels to it, but just for getting the basics, you get an hour of your time when you're awake. It's really not that hard to get the basics. I can't say that about everything, but about these commands for sure. Now, for the next level of understanding, I kind of want to put these commands in context. So 4D originally is based on Pascal. It's a little sort of subset, like a scripty version of Pascal. Pascal was very purely a procedural language coming out of the structured programming movement, so Wirth and Dijkstra. So 4D hasn't really added much of anything to the language. I mean, tons of commands and stuff, sure, but they haven't really added any structures. We don't have objects in any, we have containers, but we don't have objects in any object-oriented sense. There's nothing even remotely like an object in 4D in that sense. We don't have try-catch. There's a bunch of stuff. So what 4D has done to kind of patch the language is that they've reused eval or execute. And I would not use execute for many years because there was no way to validate it. Now, at least with method calls, we can check that a method exists before running it. So I'm more comfortable with it. Now, execute method is more or less one of these is, execute method in subform, execute on client, execute on server, new process, call form, call worker, are all really ways of executing code or spawning processes that run a method. So they seem kind of different when you get down to call form and call worker. But really, these commands, if you look at this diagram here, they're almost identical. The main thing that differs is where is the code executing? Where will it run, right? You're always running a method or expression. Sometimes it's a method. Some of these things return a result. They all take the same kind of variable parameter list, which is really helpful. Though in the case of the message hub, I'm using $1 is always an object as a constraint, a helpful constraint. So it's mostly the location of execution. And this puts these commands in a different frame. So the docs about workers docs talks about a queue and messaging, and they have this peculiar illustration of a letter going into a mailbox, the flag coming up, and then the letter goes out of the mailbox and the flag comes down, which I'm really not clear at all what that means. I mean, what that's supposed to illustrate. So if you look at these commands renamed, this is really kind of what they'd be. They're all execute methods. So call form is execute method in window. That's what it is. Execute a method in an existing window. And call worker is execute a method in a worker. That's what it is. So they're variants of execute. Now, if you look at the docs, they talk a lot about preemptive processes. They talk a lot about asynchronous execution, and they talk a lot about a queue. And frankly, none of that's relevant. They're not much. What's relevant is this, or none of them are going to paint the right picture. The thing that is hard to grasp about these commands and mastering them is where and when do they catch? What is catching them and where? Call form, it makes it feel like it's kind of like the form method is catching it, but it isn't. If you have a process that is running a form, is displaying a form, that process is going to catch the message that you send, and it's going to execute it in the context of whatever window you specify. See, when you call execute, here I'll go back one just because then you can see. If you let me get back to where to go. And it's probably this one. So when you call form, you specify a window reference. And one thing that's kind of wild about this is if you open a window and you don't display a form yet, you can still call the form. There is no form. You haven't picked a form. You've opened a window. So what 4D calls the message queue is not attached to the form. It's attached to the window reference. So as soon as you create a valid window reference, there is what 4D calls a queue there. And internally, it is a queue. A queue and a stack are the same thing. It's just which order you read them in. You can think of it as an array. It's pretty simple to think of it. It's, we've all worked with arrays, and queues and stacks are very easy to think of as arrays. So it's the window, right? Which is why I say that this should really be called call window or execute method in window. Now, when does it execute? The normal form event, it is more like an asynchronous environment where you can have clicks in different orders and things happen, and you get a call form from the outside using the old command, etc. With call form, which should really be execute method in form, it executes at the end of any current thread of execution. So if you have a dialog window up, your message is going to be sent. It will be in this queue and it will never run because there's a dialog in front blocking it, or a debug window would do the same thing, right? So I've got to grab one of my thread of execution diagrams, see if that helps. Let's see. So maybe it's a little easier. It's actually easier to understand with a worker because there's less confounding influences from form events. So when you have a worker's thread of control, you start a process. All a worker is a process that doesn't automatically end at the last line of code. Normally you have a method, you run a process, unless it's displaying a window to keep it open or you're in a loop, it'll just automatically die. With a worker, when it hits the last line of code, it just goes to sleep. So that's one thing that's special about a worker. The other thing that's special about a worker is that you can send it these messages, so-called messages. So I've got a worker running. So typically you would start it with a method and you could pass in parameters. And then there's this invisible 4D queue that's just sort of waiting. Then you call the worker first to set it up. Then you call worker with a parameter. The queue's got an item. If there's no other code running, it executes it. So it's at the end of a thread of control. It's not like a main event loop. It's not like, I don't know what to compare it to, but it's really not like any kind of queuing system in a normal sense, or any kind of asynchronous callback system in a normal sense, which isn't necessarily a problem, but it's just important to have the right mental model. So I know, Tim, you were working with some stuff with this just the other day. Does that make any difference? Like you were having dialogues that weren't getting messages because in fact the message was going to the window underneath or something?
Sure, absolutely. It makes perfect sense now when it's described this way. I've got more of an idea of how the underlying mechanism works. You know,
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. And not to pick on you, but since you're actually in the weeds on it a little bit, I mean, if you work through some questions, I will swear I made a million mistakes. I had all the problems. Any problems that you have, everyone else trying to get into it will have. So if you can think of anything to ask or to like try to like, paint a picture and we kind of refine it a little bit, it will be a help to everybody, I would think.
Well,
here's my form one, which is more complicated because the form event handler is a separate one.
yes, and so it's important when you're using call form to know when something's going to execute, and if you and by now I see that there's the 4D event queue, whatever it's doing in the background to manage all the events, the clicking and the resizing of the window and all that stuff that's going on, and you're typing keystrokes, all those things are happening, and this queue on the form is being processed, and now we've got another way to inject something into that queue, a special new event, and so now it helps understand that. And so the problem that you've got to be careful of is if you are putting up a dialog box, and you've got that stops the flow of the execution on the main form. You open a new window and issue the dialog command. Okay, boom. Now you can send all the call forms you want into that form, and they're going to stack up and sit there and wait until that a dialog command finishes, and now the execution falls on through, and then it picks those up. So that's something I didn't realize was happening. Now it makes perfect sense, understanding how they've implemented this new call form into their existing form event queue system. That's kind of how I'm interpreting.
Yeah, that sounds good. I like all that. Let me pick up on a few of the points there, just to clarify or to amplify. One is that, okay, it's really normal there are probably people right now or people watching this later, if anyone does ever, thinking, oh yeah, it's like a form event, and it really isn't. There is no form event. It's a whole separate system. And while there's multiple things happening when you're running a form, so it's not easy to see. This is separate. There is no on call form, right?
That's true. There's
the old one, which is an event, but
it's
this
separate.
Is separate.
But the form, but the form event system can block this from running. It's not like it's not a form event, so to speak, but it interacts with all the other form events, because if you got a dialog open, then clicks and everything on the window behind it don't get processed. And this kind of,
And this is why I try to emphasize it's a thread of control. When you have a form window open as a process, it has one thread of control. It only runs one line of code at a time. And so if you have anything that's blocking the thread from moving forward, like a debug window, or a dialog, which if you'll look and see in the debugger, it's kind of blocked you, then all this other stuff might be piling up in the background, but there's no way for it to happen because, things are processed in a one line at a time, orderly fashion. Now, if you look at Thomas's presentation, he does a nice job and has some simple demos that really illustrate the point well. Part of the purpose of call form was to get around some limits on dialog with an asterisk where you just couldn't reach into it and do anything with it or get to the values or work with it as a displayed form. So because the call form is actually calling a window reference, you can send messages amongst windows in the same process. So if you have 3 windows open, like Thomas shows, you can send messages around. So it's actually designed to get around some of the problems that you ran into, I ran into, and pretty much everybody that works with this is likely to run into. So you just have to remember where things are executing and where you want them to execute. So when you're in is this the right one? No, that's not it. Get rid of that.
Well, and I'd like to just also emphasize one of your the circle in the middle there, the invisible 4D queue for for executing, for calling the worker and whatnot, the worker queue or however we want to look at it. That can be a specific complication or a difficulty in working with the workers, because there's no way at all really to look at what's in the queue, what's going to be processed, unless you do that manually. Now I've done that manually. It does.
Oh, how
work.
have you done that?
I set up a worker, and I'm happy to share the code. I just have to, tweak, pretty it up a little bit. But simply by having a worker, I have a worker watcher worker. That every time I call a worker, I also call the watcher, and I say, I keep a tally of jobs that are running in all of the other workers.
Oh, wow. I'm
Yeah.
totally stealing that and forgetting it was your idea.
Yeah, no, I'll have to share the code fast then. But
Yeah.
That's
actually that's great.
Yeah, it's a very manual way of doing it, and I wholly believe that 4D probably has something coming down the pipe that will also.
No evidence to support your point of view, but okay, go ahead.
that maybe not this version or the next version, but it's certainly necessary. Just because otherwise, and I know that David has had some discussion about this in the forum and on the NUG, that if you're using any of these messaging, all these call workers and call forms for anything of value, you certainly don't want to lose that and you want to have some knowledge as to the fact that they actually get handled before, if your system quits, you don't want to dump 1,000 valuable packets of information that haven't been processed yet. So, this is a new functionality, and you can certainly see that it's evolving. It's a very well implemented and simply implemented in its first derivation here. But
yep.
There's a few more things that would be great to add. And
let me back up a sec to explain the problem that Brent's describing a solution to. So workers, you can show UI in them, but I don't. It just seems more straightforward to treat them as being windowless. And if you ever did want to use them as preemptive, they would have to be basically have to be windowless. Oh, and by the way, I've watched, after I spent a couple months on this, I looked back at the summit presentations and then reread the docs again. And there's a whole lot of talk about preemptive mode and workers. The only thing I can see that they have in connection to each other is it's what made 4D think about doing this. But in a practical level, they're not closely related subjects at all. I mean, we could get into preemptive mode, but we don't have time. Preemptive mode has some good uses, and workers can be a part of that. But honestly, you can just use new process. In fact, I will be using new process most likely, most of the time for preemptive processes. But anyway, a whole nother subject. But yeah, don't get too bogged down in the preemptive thing, because you can treat it as irrelevant unless it is relevant to you, in which case really focus on the preemptive parts. Anyway, the problem Brent's talking about is this. Okay, if you got a worker, and let's just take, you remember I had that little log worker, so all the forms we're doing is, clicks happen and they get sent over to the log. This is a good way to do logs, etc. Well, 4D's docs talk about a queue, because they have a queue. They stack up all these messages in a queue. So the first one in is the first one processed, then the oldest one is the last one processed. That's it. It's a queue. Now, in a normal environment, and Brent's been working with Stomp and I think RabbitMQ, right? Have you gotten that? You've gone past prototyping, or you're still just prototyping?
Mostly prototyping, but
okay.
It's definitely it's an interesting parallel to this kind of conversation, this kind of strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, Rabbit is a real queuing system, and it can do all kinds of stuff. It's pretty amazing looking. And Miyako wrote a plugin to work with Stomp, which is a sort of a intermediary wire format to make it possible to access a few different queues. So that's a whole different subject. But anyway, so Brent's got a lot of interest and knowledge about queues, and the 4D queuing system is much more modest in its ambitions. So again, the design choices and brave ones that I wouldn't have made, and I think you can do a ton anyway. But the problem is here, when you have a normal queuing system, normally, an actual queuing system, what you're able to do is you're able to inspect the queue. So you can say, how big is it?
Exactly.
How busy is it? Like you might want to start a second one. Let's say I want to start a second log writer because, oh, I was sending errors and events to the same processor to handle and to spit into different logs, which would be easy. But it's getting too busy. It's backlogging. I better split it out and to make it 2.
Right.
Well, while 4D, from their point of view, has a queue that they can see, what we have is, imagine a guy sitting behind a counter and there's a window. Imagine the DMV office and there's a guy there and he's sitting at the window and he's looking out at a door. And in that door is where the line starts, the queue. It's a queue here, it's a line in America. So there's a bunch of people in line, but the door is constructed so he can only see one person. So from our point of view, we're the guy behind the counter in this case. We can tell one thing about the queue. Is there anything in it? Or is there nothing in it? 0 or 1. That's it. We can't say there's 100,000 things. There's 10 things. So there's no way to do load balancing, nothing like that. Now, to break my metaphor, there is no guy behind the window. Instead, you got people that can come into the room one at a time, and once they're in there, they can do whatever they want.
And not only that, if you are running preemptive, which I totally dig, and I've been able to leverage a lot in new systems, the guy behind the window doesn't even have a telephone.
No, there's no guy. When the message comes in, it's executed immediately. There's no like on, worker on message received where you could inspect the method and dispatch it to another worker or kill it because it's rogue or whatever. There's none of that stuff.
You can't talk between processes, and that's where the call form is handy, because that's where it can reach out with some information to say, hey, I did something. I don't know how many more somethings I have, but something happened. But yeah, so go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. So that's one issue. The other issue is this. Let's say you're sending out weblog entries and you quit, or you just quit. Let's just say in an orderly way. I'm not saying you crashed or anything. Well, the web process has a queue of messages and that are waiting to be written out to the log, and you're going to lose some. Or if you use the kill worker command, or you call a worker and tell it to kill itself, likewise, you're going to lose some. This is not a bug. This is a design reality. I mean, there's differences between bugs and design choices, really. They did not design the queue to be a robust system for transactional data which must be recorded. It doesn't do that. It's not designed to do that. So if you try to get it to do that, well, it sounds like Brent's going to prove me wrong here, but if you're going to try to do that, at the very least, you're going to have to do a bunch of extra work, because that's not its intent. So I think it's only fair to judge these commands by their intent, and that clearly was never the intent. There are queuing systems which are transactionally sound, or at least are no loss, so you can preserve a queue.
Yeah,
that's not what 4D went for here.
Yeah, I'd say you get a lot of bang for your buck, but some of the things to harden it up and to make sure that that your queues actually get processed and whatnot is going to be left up to you at the moment.
Yeah. Or you can just use it for what it's good at, because I mean, more elaborate queue systems are truly harder to use, and what 4D's done is really pretty simple.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some things I always would, right? I'm like that. I think you guys know that by now about me. But I think what they've done is admirable, and it's the amount of what bang for your buck is the right way to put it. For the amount of features and flexibility and power you get for the simplicity of the command set is truly impressive. So that's why I got excited about it and put a couple of months into it. But now it's like, I've moved on. I'm doing other stuff. So look, I think as we've run pretty late. So if people want to ask some questions, I'm happy to hang around or whatever, but I don't want to keep up people too late. I mean, it's getting towards 11 in the morning my time, so it's got to be late for some of you.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them up on Reddit now or in the future. We'll try to catch those and direct David to answer them. But in the meantime, just want to put up David's contact information here, his email that I'm sure he's happy that I'm blasting all over the internets, and his LinkedIn links there. And those are a couple of his books, the Bibles for some of writing 4D code. So he's a really good authority on all of this. Anybody else have questions right now? Feel free to jump in, either blurt them out or write them somewhere. In the meantime, I'll talk about our next meeting. You can see our schedule. Let's see, at the 4dmethod.com site /schedule or up in the menu bar up there. Our next meeting will be having a friend of the show, Danny Bobian, will be talking about a new component that he's put together called code coverage, which will actually be useful for people who are looking at what code is being actually called, what code do I need to maintain, what code can be retired, deprecated, stripped out, and generally how much of my code base is in use and how much is it in use. We have an open date for anyone else who'd like to jump in and do a presentation on November 15th, and pretty soon we'll be posting dates for next year as well. So if you have some ideas for what you'd like to present or show off, or perhaps in a warm-up or a post 4D Summit presentation, it's all good for that. So anyways, wrapping up, are there any other questions or discussion? Feedback is always appreciated. Tell me how good or bad or wonderful or useful the meeting has been. Let me just take a peek at the discussion here. There's only one thread execution, right? So just more discussion, and I'm sure we'll continue after this about how the call worker and call form and the messaging system that David Adams provided works. So yeah, so thanks everyone for coming and staying and taking part in the discussion. We will see you next time at 4D Method. Thanks, David.
Yep, thanks.
Okay, all right. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone at 4D as well.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.